Hey guys, my name is Jordan. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to have kind of a chill hangout vibe where I talk you through the history of my bookshelf using a tag that was originally created by Emma Books. I will leave her original video linked down below, and there you can also find all of the questions written out. I have made a slight edit for my purposes, but I'll explain it when I get there. So yeah, I'm just going to chat about some books that I own. So the first question is, what is the oldest book that you own? And for this one, I've gone with the one that is physically the oldest, not just the one that I've owned the longest. And for me, that is this edition of Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. It is the illustrated junior library edition. I inherited this from my grandfather. It's got a really cool spine. Obviously this is a sleeve, and this is the actual book with a little bit of a illustration on the cover that, as someone who has not read this book, I don't understand the context of. This book is in good enough condition that I could probably read it. It's got really cool illustrations throughout. This is probably not actually, now that I'm thinking about it, the oldest book that I own, but it's the oldest one that I can pick up without worrying that it'll fall apart, because I actually also inherited my grandfather's collection of his favorite classics, but those are all paperbacks that have they have really not fared well with age, so they're all on this, I don't know how to point in the mirror kind of thing. They're on this bookshelf over here, but they're on the bottom shelves behind all of my other books because I don't want to get rid of them, because obviously they have like emotional significance, but I can't actually read them, so I don't really know what I'm gonna do with those, but I have them. Oh, here's the edit I made. The original questions start with, it's a book you read in 2013, and then it goes on to 2014 and 2015 and 2016, and I'm just going to take out the question that's a book from 2013 because I didn't start using Goodreads until 2014, and I honestly could not tell you a specific book that I read in 2013. So we're going to start with a book that I read in 2014, which was The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender by Leslie Walton. This was one of my favorite books in my early high school years, and I think I would probably still really enjoy it if I reread it now. I just haven't reread it. I don't know, maybe I haven't ever reread it. This is a really interesting book about a young girl who has wings and figuring out why she was born with wings. Very good. I would recommend it. Then the next one is a book that you read in 2015. For me, this is The Martian by Andy Weir. I read this when I was in DC for an engineering conference in high school. It was a very fun time, very topical read. I really enjoyed this book. This was probably the first like adult hardcore sci-fi book I ever read that I really loved. Although, I mean, it's sci-fi, but it's like realistic sci-fi. Yeah, you've probably read it. It's a good book. Then a book that you read in 2016, I chose for this one A Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schwab. This is the second book in the, I don't remember what this series is called. The first one's, don't remember what the first one's called either. A Darker Shade of Magic. It's A Darker Shade of Magic. I'm sure most of you will have heard of this series, so I'm not really going to talk about it, but yeah, I read this, and I probably need to reread this soon because I never read A Conjuring of Light, so I think I need to reread the first two books before I finish this off. Not for any, there's no reason that I didn't read that one, it's just that I never got around to it, so I really want to read it, but we'll see. My computer is not going to stop reflecting off my glasses, so I apologize for that, but it's what's happening. It's the vibe. A book that you read in 2017, for me this is The Whispering Skull by Jonathan Stroud. This is the second book, I believe. Yes, the second book in the Lockwood & Co. series. This is probably my favorite middle grade series that I've started as an adult. I have a couple of others that are favorites from when I was a kid, but I read the first one, which is the Screaming Staircase. I read the Screaming Staircase I think like my sophomore year of high school, and I just finished the series because the last book just came out I think in 2019. I think it came out last year, maybe 2018. Love this series, would highly recommend. I think I'm going to do a video talking about my favorite middle grades soon, and this will definitely be discussed there. A book you read in 2018. For me, this is The Four Fingers of Death by Rick Moody. I'm talking about this not because it's a particularly good book, but because it's a particularly long book, and I'm proud of myself for having read it. It's 700 pages long. The thing with this book is that it's actually really 2 books in one, and the first book of the 2 books is very good, which tricked me into believing that I had found a hidden gem. However, the second book of the 2 books is not very good, and it's like a length of an entire regular book, so it kind of sucked. I will say a highlight of this book is that in the first part of it, they do refer to a man's dick as a space arm. So if that's something you're interested in, maybe read the first half of this. Okay, and then the last of the years that we're going through is a book that you read in 2019. And for this one, I'm going to go with Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. This is one of my dad's favorite books of all time, and after reading it, I can safely say it's one of my favorite sci-fi books of all time. I wouldn't say if I would say it's like a top 10 favorite, but among the sci-fi genre, it's definitely one of my favorites. This was the first Neil Stephenson book I ever read, so I think I need to go read more. I would say one of my favorite things about this book is that it's referenced in Aurora Rising by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff, which is a very good book that I think I also read in 2019. Yeah, I think I read that like right after reading this, and so that's pretty much the only reason that I caught the reference, but that's a fun time. The next question is a book you've read more than once. For this one, I thought about going with Harry Potter, but I'm doing my best to avoid talking about Harry Potter because I think everybody knows everything there is to know about it and probably knows more than I do. So instead, obviously that's one that I've read more than once, like every single book in the series I think, except The Deathly Hallows, which I don't think I've ever reread. But I'm going with The Mother-Daughter Book Club by Heather Vogel Frederick, and actually this entire series, there are 7 books in it. I haven't ever read the 7th, but it's on my list, but I've reread the other 6 a lot. This is another one of my favorite middle grade series. Then we have a book that you waited for over a year to be published. For this one, I went with Stiletto by Daniel O'Malley. This is the sequel to The Rook, it's the second book in the Checky files. I really can't pronounce how you say it, but it doesn't matter. This is actually both my parents are readers, and this is one of our collective favorite series, so this is one that like every 6 months or so after we read The Rook, someone would be like, hey, when is that book coming out? We would sit down and discuss like how good The Rook was. I think it took like 2 or 3 years for this to come out though, so we were very on top of trying to figure out when it was happening, but it took a while, and I still haven't read it. Then we have a book that you read on vacation / away from home. This one, I went with Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. I read this when I was in Boston 2 years ago? Yeah, 2 years ago, for a wedding, and really enjoyed it. It's a super quick read, so it was a nice kind of like vacation, like every time I had like a couple of minutes to spare, I would just sit down and read some, and I really enjoyed it. It's definitely another one of my favorite sci-fi books. Then we have a book that you got from someplace special, anything that's not your local bookstore or online retailer, and for this one I went with my copy of A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. I bought this while in New York like 5 or 6 years ago from the New York Public Library. It's got the little lion stamp on the front of it, so yeah. And then we have a book that made you cry. For this I went with The Blood of Olympus by Rick Riordan. This is the last book in the Heroes of Olympus series, if there's anyone that doesn't know. I don't cry to books a lot, and this is honestly the only one that I think it's the only one that I own that has ever made me cry. And I didn't cry because this was particularly sad. I know a lot of people didn't like how this series ended, but I just kind of cried because it was over. Like, it was like a realization moment that like this thing had been an integral part of my like childhood and like growing up was kind of really over. I don't even know if we knew about Trials of Apollo at the time, so I think this might have been me like crying over the fact that like I was done getting any new Percy Jackson content ever, which didn't end up being the case, and I haven't finished all the Trials of Apollo books, so no spoilers for that, please. But yeah, so I cried when I finished this book just because I finished this book. And then we have a book that you read in one sitting. For me, this was Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Alire Sanz. I did not mean to read this book all at once. I think I picked it up at like 1 in the morning. I think I just intended to read like a couple of chapters before bed and just have something to pick up again in the morning, but instead I read the whole thing, so it's a great book. You should read it. And then we have a book that was a gift, and for this one I went with Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I asked for this book for Christmas after it got really popular on BookTube in, I don't know what year this was published, like 2015, 2016? It had to be earlier than 2016. 2013. So fairly early on, I requested this book from my parents, and I got it for Christmas. And I tabbed like the first half of it, but then I think I got too into it to tab it, but I haven't reread it since the first time I read it, so honestly don't know how I would feel about that book now. But I still haven't read Golden Sun, and I do own it, so maybe that's something I should do. Then we have a book that you read before owning, which you can see in the corner. It's Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. I listened to the audiobook of this on Scribd because at the time I had no expendable income to go buy books with, but I did have a Scribd subscription, so everyone was talking about it and I just had to read it, and I'm glad I did. And then eventually when I had some spare money I went and bought it. Another great book. A book that you lent to someone else. For me, this is Scarlet by Marissa Meyer, the second book in the Lunar Chronicles series. This is actually, I think, the whole Lunar Chronicles series. My little sister actually pretty much shares my shelves. She has her own books, but she doesn't have as big of a collection, so whenever she's thinking of reading something, she'll come in here and pick something out, and she read my copies of these books. Then we have a book that got damaged. For me, this is my exclusive collector's edition of Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell, which actually, like, from the outside now, I did some work on it, so it looks okay, but I kinda sorta ran over this book with my bike, so bad decisions were made. We don't really need to talk about it. A book that you got on sale or discounted. I bought The Queen of the Tearling by Erica Johansson for $1 at my library bookstore. I actually bought the hardcover editions of the entire series for $3 total, which was amazing. I actually already owned the paperback edition of this, which is what I read, but when I saw the whole series all together in hardback for $3, I had to buy it. So yeah, and this one has a ribbon bookmark, so obviously it had to be mine. Then we have a book that you read with someone else, I believe, like buddy read or read in a book club. I have really never done that, so instead I chose a book that I read for class that I actually enjoyed, which was Villette by Charlotte Bronte. I read this for a class I was in last semester called 19th Century Women Novelists, where we read a ton of different great books, but I really enjoyed Villette in particular. The next question is a book that you associate with a song. For this one, I went with The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang. I actually talk all about why I associate this book with the song and what song I associate it with in the video that I posted on Wednesday, which is recommending you guys books based on songs off of my May playlist, so I will link that down below if you want to check it out. But if you're just curious for a little taste, I associate this one with The Feeling by Sammy Ray, which is a great song. But yeah, if you want to know my reasoning behind that, go watch that other video. There are other great music/book recommendations in there as well. Then we have a book that you associate with a food, and for this one I went with Since You've Been Gone by Morgan Matson, which I, for I think fairly obvious reasons, associate with ice cream. Besides just being on the cover, she works at like an ice cream shop, I think. I think that's part of it, is that she either already did or like ends up working there at a store. I read this like 2 or 3 years ago and I haven't reread it since. I did enjoy it though, so I think this summer it might be one that I go back to. But yeah, Since You've Been Gone and ice cream. Then we have a book that you bought years ago that you probably wouldn't buy now. For this one, I went with Looking for Alaska by John Green, and honestly, pretty much any John Green book that's on my shelves. I actually already got rid of my copy of Paper Towns without ever reading it. It's not that I hate John Green, it's just that I think I tried to make myself like him too much. When I first read The Fault in Our Stars, I read it twice in the space of like a month because I kind of felt like I was missing something about why people liked it so much. Again, it's not that I hate him or that it's even that they're not bad books, but to me they're just like superbly mediocre books. So I don't think I would spend my time on them nowadays. Then we have a book that you associate with a specific time in your life. For this, I went with Pies and Prejudice, which is the 4th book in the Mother-Daughter Book Club series by Heather Vogel Frederick. Yes, the one that I just mentioned. I specifically associate this one with a pretty long trip that my family took one summer to California, and I bought this there, and it's actually the first book I read in the series because I didn't know it was a series when I bought it. Obviously, I went back and figured that out. But yeah, so I associate it with both that vacation and then also the phase of my life that followed wherein I devoured this entire series and it became one of my all-time favorites. So yeah, a very significant book to me. 2 more. The second to last question is a book that you used to like but don't anymore. This one is a little iffy for me. I'm choosing The Maze Runner by James Dashner for a couple of reasons. One is that I loved this series when I first started reading it back when it was super popular, and I really even enjoyed the movies, at least I think only the first 2 got theatrical releases, but I don't know if going back now, I think this would be one of the like super popular books from that time that did not, how do I say this? I think that this, like Divergent, probably captivated my middle school psyche, but probably wouldn't fascinate me now. I don't think I would really like this series if I went back and reread it. And now we know a lot of highly problematic things about James Dashner, so I don't particularly want to support his work by liking it or promoting it. So yeah. Last question. For this one, it is the newest book that's on your shelf, and I can definitively say that that is The Dry by Jane Harper. This is the first book in the Aaron Falk series, I believe. Is it Falk? This is a, I think, fairly popular mystery series that I actually bought because I was scoping out what one of my local bookstores had in stock for curbside pickup to do some supporting of my local bookstores, and I was going through all of the previous Goodreads Choice Awards nominees over the past like 5 years for mystery, and I actually don't remember if this one won one, but the second book in the series won one a couple of years ago, so I went back and traced the first one and they had it in stock, so I bought it, and this is probably pretty high on my list for getting too soon. I actually meant to be reading this right now, but I picked up The Night Circus instead, so I think this will probably be what I get to right after the Believe-a-thon, if I don't have a couple of days to read it beforehand. I'm not really sure how long The Night Circus is going to take me at this point, because not gonna lie guys, I'm not loving it so far. That's the history of my bookshelves. Maybe at one point I will do a bookshelf tour, but I've never shown y'all a full view of my bookshelves, so I'm gonna insert a little clip here of what they look like. I have a lot of them, and they're not super organized right now, and I'm thinking about reorganizing them, but I'm not really sure if I'm going to do a video of that because it takes me usually multiple days to reorganize them when I get the idea in my head, so I will have to decide. If you're interested in that, let me know down below. If I know that someone would watch it, then I would put in an effort to do it, but at this point I'm not really sure. So yeah, that's all I have for you today, and I will see you in the next video.